Welcome back to Pneumanosophy Academy. This time we're exploring the charges levelled against Jung that he was an anti-Semite and a Nazi sympathizer. Coming up. Here at Pneumanosophy Academy, we believe in expanding consciousness, in taking that pilgrimage into the imaginal. I'm Lewis, and if you'd like to be part of Pneumanosophy, do subscribe and click that bell. In 1936, Walter Kimball, a German psychotherapist and Nazi Party member, wrote a letter to Carl Jung, thanking him for his affirming attitude towards the German Führer, Adolf Hitler. An affirming attitude which Kimball believed was conveyed in Jung's most recent essay, Wotan, which was also published in that same year in 1936. Walter Kimball was a zealous Nazi who believed Hitler was fulfilling a messianic role for the Aryan race, unleashing their true potential. Despite, however, Kimball's beliefs and allegiance, he maintained a cordial correspondence with Jung, which spanned a period both pre- and post-World War II. Indeed, Jung maintained a number of relationships with German colleagues who were at one time or another involved in National Socialism, but also there were a number of relationships which did not survive the war. So, to what extent can this be taken as evidence that he did harbour Nazi sympathies? To begin exploring this question, we should begin with that essay that Walter Kimball plodded, Wotan. This essay was written, as I said, in 1936, 3 years before the beginning of World War II. As such, this essay does not benefit from what we know now. It was written before Hitler's aggressive expansion, before the war's dead had piled up, and before those death camps had even begun operating. In the essay, Jung argues that the receding tide of Christendom in Europe had created, if you like, the fertile psychic conditions for the primordial deity of the Germanic people to re-emerge, that one-eyed Nordic god called Odin, or, as the name is rendered in the High German, Wotan, that restless god of war and thunder. The idea being then that within the collective Germanic psyche, Wotan was lying dormant, but that his spirit was now beginning to re-emerge. It was emanating forth out of the German Black Forest and capturing the imaginations of the Germanic youth. It was the spirit behind National Socialism and had been incarnated in the Führer himself.
Dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe.
So, without the benefit of hindsight, the paper is alarmingly sympathetic to Nazism. He treats Germany in the paper as if it were akin to just one of his patients on the couch, one of his patients undergoing some kind of psychic seizing, a psychic seizing which could, for his patients, mark the beginning of psychological regression, but more often marked the beginning of a renewal, of individuation. And it's this sentiment which characterises the Wotan paper, a cautious optimism that what would transpire would ultimately be a positive awakening amongst Germanic peoples. So obviously, a bit of an oopsie on Jung's part that he would spend the rest of his life trying to row back on. The trouble, I think, with exploring this topic at all is there's a tendency in all of us to be quite tribalistic, I think. If we're on Team Jung, we're inclined to mitigate these damaging accusations. We may attempt to explain them away in some manner. Or equally, if we're on Team Jungian detractor, we may be inclined to use this stuff as ammunition against him and his ideas. A way of dismissing analytical psychology out of hand. Both responses are problematic. Doesn't the answer always lie in some nuanced middle space? Anyway, back to Wotan. The paper suggests, I've already indicated, that there is either a geographical psychological element at play, which is to say psychic energy within topography, i.e. the German Black Forest, and or, more problematically, a racial psychological element at play, going way above and beyond just mere cultural influence. And I think it's this which Jung is driving at in the paper. This idea, however, does seem to fly in the face of Jung's psychology as a whole, namely Jung's theory of the psyche, which comprises, as you may know, consciousness, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. And it's not at all clear where racial psychology would fit into such a model. Indeed, Jung would go on subsequently to deny vehemently the place of racial psychology within his system, but nevertheless, I don't think we can get away from it that easily. It was clearly a part of his psychology, at least early on, and nowhere is this clearer than on the Semitic question itself. So, there are several places in Jung's work, again pre-war, in which he distinguishes between Jewish and Aryan psychology, most infamously when he says, quote, "The Aryan unconscious has a higher potential than the Jewish." This kind of anti-Semitic sentiment on Jung's part goes back as far as 1918. Part of the argument against him being anti-Semitic from some quarters has been to note his affinity with Jewish mysticism, at least in later life, and to note his friendships with Jewish people, such as Sigmund Freud. But this fails to recognise that even Freud himself cited Jung's anti-Semitism as a primary factor in their ultimate estrangement. Remember, psychoanalysis was regarded as a Jewish science, which Jung, the Protestant, the son of a pastor, was poised to legitimise for the Aryan world. Jung's troubling relationship, then, with the Third Reich cannot easily be glossed over. His work was used during the war to feed the Nazi propaganda machine, and many Nazis regarded his work positively. However, despite all this, by the late 1940s, Jung was articulating a clear anti-Nazi position. And he sought from then on to distance himself from all racial psychology and disavow all previously articulated anti-Semitic sentiment. Now, I don't think his change of heart wholly exonerates Jung. If we want to hold his work in high regard, as I do, then I think that naturally does entail us holding the man himself to a higher standard, a standard that it's hard to argue that he lived up to. My conclusion here then is certainly not intended as a means of dismissing Jung and his work, but rather as a caution. As we consider and wrestle with Jung's remarkable psychology, we must remain vigilant and critical at all times. Jungian ideas have been used in the past to legitimise far-right ideology, and there's no reason to think that it could not be used in such a way again. Thanks for watching. Please do subscribe if you haven't done so already, and thanks in particular to my Patreon subscribers. If you'd like to watch some more Pneumanosophy Academy, you can click here, or you can click here for more Jungian psychology. See you next time.